Welcome, weary traveler. You've left the noise of the world behind and stepped into a realm untouched by time. Here, candlelight dances upon ancient stone walls, and the air carries the soft hum of forgotten lullabies. Beyond these gates, the night is gentle, and every story is a silver thread, weaving warmth around your heart. So rest your mind. Let each word be a quiet step into the halls of dreams until sleep, tender and deep, finds you. You are safe here, and the world drifts away. Chapter 1. The Gentle Walls of Starlight Keep. The keep stood quietly upon the rise, its pale stone walls bathed in the silver glow of evening. It was not a fortress of war, nor a tower meant for dread, but rather a sanctuary, an old, gentle place where the stars always seemed to linger longer, as though they, too, found comfort in its stillness. The people of the valley called it the quiet keep of Starlight, and for as long as memory stretched, it had been a place of rest rather than command. The night was mild, the air cool but not cold, carrying with it the fragrance of lilacs blooming along the garden paths. A brook wound its way near the base of the keep, its voice a constant murmur, soft as a lullaby. Lanterns flickered along the walls, their flames swaying in the calm breeze, painting golden halos upon the stone. Inside the keep, all was calm. Alaska, robed in deep blue velvet, sat near a tall window, her gaze tilted upward toward the first stars pricking the sky. Her hair fell loosely across her shoulders, catching a faint shimmer of moonlight as though it carried strands of silver within. She rested her chin upon her hand, listening to the quiet hum of the night, letting it settle over her like a cloak. Beside her, in the warm glow of the chamber, Leo tuned a lute. Each note rang gently, testing the strings, then softening, until the melody emerged slow and tender, more sigh than song. The sound filled the keep's hall with a kind of still joy, a reminder that music was less about noise and more about the spaces between notes, the pauses where one could breathe and listen and drift. Further along the hall, near the hearth where the fire burned low, Miranda arranged cushions upon a rug. She was older than Alaska and Leo, her hands lined from years but graceful in their movements. She placed a pot of spiced milk near the fire, its steam curling faintly into the air, filling the chamber with the comforting scent of cinnamon and honey. Everything she did was measured, calm, as though she wove peace itself with each gesture. The three shared the keep not as rulers and servants, but as companions. They tended to it together, its gardens, its kitchens, its libraries, its quiet towers. They welcomed travelers who passed by, offering them a bed, a meal, and the peace of silence before sending them onward. But tonight was their own. Tonight belonged to the keep, and to the stars, and to the slow, steady rhythm of breath and fire. Alaska turned from the window at last and moved toward the hearth, her long sleeves trailing softly against the stone floor. She lowered herself to the cushions beside Miranda, folding her legs beneath her. The warmth of the fire touched her cheeks, gentle and steady. "Another clear sky," she murmured, her voice no louder than the brook outside. Miranda nodded, smiling faintly. "The stars favor us often. They know we keep their company well." Leo plucked a note upon the lute, then let it drift into a melody that curved like the night itself. Slow, rising, falling, settling. His eyes remained half closed, his expression somewhere between wakefulness and dream. The music seemed to fill the air with a softness beyond sound, a kind of hush that deepened the quiet rather than broke it. The pot of milk warmed fully, and Miranda poured it into 3 clay cups. She handed one to Alaska, one to Leo, and cradled her own between her palms. The drink was sweet, fragrant, and warm enough to spread through the body like light itself. They sipped in silence, letting the flavor linger, letting the stillness of the keep stretch comfortably around them. Outside, the brook gurgled softly. A night bird sang once, twice, then settled. From beyond the keep, the valley lay stretched in shadow, its fields silvered by the moon. The cottages of distant villagers glowed faintly, their windows alight with the last of the day's embers. But here, upon the rise, all felt timeless, as though the keep and the stars had formed a pact long ago, to hold each other in stillness forever. Alaska leaned her head against the cushion, her eyes drifting to the flames. The fire danced lazily, each crackle a small punctuation in the quiet. "Do you ever think," she said slowly, "that peace is its own story? One that writes itself without battles or triumphs. Just the quiet of nights like this." Leo's fingers stilled on the lute. He looked at her with a soft expression. "If so, then this keep is a chapter, and we are the words written within." Miranda chuckled softly, her voice low and kind. "Then may we be long sentences, drawn out and unhurried, stories worth lingering over." Their laughter was not loud, but warm, rippling through the chamber like the brook's song. They sipped again, the spiced milk soothing, the fire comforting, the music resuming in notes softer still. Time stretched gently, the night deepened, the stars above multiplied until the sky became a river of silver light. Through the tall window, the constellations glimmered, steady and sure, as though stitched into the heavens by a hand that loved quiet as much as they did. Alaska rose after a time and crossed once more to the window. She placed her hand upon the stone sill, leaning slightly outward, breathing in the cool night air. The scent of lilacs touched her again. The brook's voice reached her clearly, threading through the silence. She closed her eyes and let the world expand within her chest, until she felt both as small as a star and as vast as the sky. Behind her, Leo's music slowed further, each note lingering long before the next arrived. Miranda hummed softly to herself, tidying the cups, her voice blending with the strings. Together, it was less a song than a cradle of sound, rocking the chamber gently towards stillness. Alaska whispered into the night, though no one but the stars heard, "May peace linger here, may it never leave." And the stars, in their endless silence, seemed to answer, not in words, but in the way they glowed more brightly, casting their silver blessing upon the quiet keep of Starlight. Within, the 3 companions let the night fold around them like a blanket. The fire dimmed, the lute quieted, the last sip of spiced milk warmed their bellies. Silence, soft and infinite, became the true host of the keep. And as the brook continued its lullaby, and the stars leaned closer to listen, Alaska, Leo, and Miranda rested together in the gentle embrace of a night that asked nothing of them but to be still. Chapter 2. The Garden of Night Blossoms. The next evening came softly, as if the day itself wished not to disturb the keep. Sunset painted the valley in long strokes of amber and rose, and then slowly, steadily, twilight followed, drawing a veil of violet over the hills. The quiet keep of Starlight waited patiently, its stones soaking in the last warmth of the sun before surrendering to the cool silver of the moon. Alaska was the first to step outside into the garden. The path was lined with worn stones, smoothed by generations of footsteps, each one warmed by the lingering touch of daylight. She carried no lantern, for she liked to greet the stars as they appeared, one by one, with no light between her and the sky. The air carried the fragrance of night-blooming flowers, white jasmine, pale roses, and star-shaped blossoms that opened only when the moon shone. She breathed deeply, feeling the coolness settle into her skin, and sat upon a stone bench carved long ago, its surface polished by time. From here, she could see the valley stretching outward, a silver river winding through it, the roofs of cottages faintly glimmering, smoke rising in threads from their chimneys. But more than the view, it was the quiet rhythm of the garden that held her. The rustle of leaves, the chirp of crickets, the soft sigh of a night breeze. Leo joined her not long after. He carried his lute carefully in one hand and a lantern in the other, though he set the lantern on the ground without lighting it. "It feels wrong," he said with a faint smile, "to steal light when the moon gives so much." Alaska glanced at him, her eyes soft. "The moon is generous tonight." Leo plucked a single note on the lute, letting it hum in the air. Then another and another, until a melody began to thread itself into the night. It was slower than his music of the previous evening, more delicate, each note a pause more than a sound. The flowers seemed to lean toward it, as though even the petals listened. Miranda appeared last, her pace unhurried, her shawl drawn loosely about her shoulders. She carried a small basket filled with sprigs of lavender and fresh herbs, which she placed beside the bench before settling beside Alaska. Her presence was grounding, her movements calm, as though she, too, was part of the rhythm of the garden itself. "The night blossoms have opened," she said, her voice low. "They keep their own time, and yet they always know when to reveal themselves." Alaska reached toward one of the pale blooms, not to pluck it, but to touch it lightly. The petals felt cool beneath her fingers, like soft silk woven from starlight. "They remind me of patience," she whispered. Miranda nodded, "and of trust, that the night will always come, and with it, their time." The three sat together, listening as Leo's music filled the spaces between their words. Above them, the stars thickened in the velvet sky. The moon had risen higher now, silver and round, its glow bathing the keep and garden alike. It seemed to smooth the rough edges of stone and leaf, transforming everything into a dreamscape. A breeze stirred gently, carrying the fragrance of the blossoms across the garden. The brook's voice reached them faintly, a soft reminder that the world was always moving, even in stillness. After a while, Leo lowered the lute and let his fingers rest upon the strings. He gazed upward, his expression thoughtful. "Sometimes," he said, "I wonder if the stars hear us as clearly as we see them. Do they listen to the music, the words, the quiet of nights like this?" Alaska tilted her head. "I think they do. Why else would they shine brighter when we look up at them?" Miranda smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting the lantern's unlit glass. "Perhaps they are companions as we are. Each night, they gather above, and together we keep watch, with them, with the flowers, with each other." The thought hung in the air, simple and comforting. Time stretched as it often did in the quiet keep. They did not hurry it along, nor measure it with tasks. Instead, they let it fold around them, each breath and sound weaving into the tapestry of the evening. Miranda reached into her basket, pulling out a small cloth pouch tied with twine. She untied it and revealed sugared almonds within, their pale shells glimmering faintly in the moonlight. She offered them to Alaska and Leo, who each took one. The almonds were sweet, faintly spiced, the sugar crackling softly before melting upon the tongue. It was a small indulgence, yet it felt like part of the ritual of peace, the kind of detail that made nights memorable not for grandeur but for gentleness. Alaska leaned back slightly, letting her hair tumble over her shoulders. She closed her eyes, listening to the garden. The crickets chirped in even rhythm. The brook whispered. The petals rustled softly, brushing against one another. The keep itself seemed to hum faintly, as though its stones remembered every quiet evening it had cradled. Leo began to play again, this time a lullaby. The melody curved and swayed like the brook's water, carrying no urgency, no destination, only the promise of calm. Miranda hummed along, her voice low and warm, adding depth to the song without words. The stars seemed to lean closer. The blossoms swayed gently. The night deepened. Eventually, Leo let the final note fade into silence, and Miranda's humming quieted with it. They did not speak for a long moment. Instead, they simply breathed, together in rhythm with the night. At last, Miranda rose, brushing her shawl lightly. "The fire will be low by now," she said gently. "Shall we return?" Alaska opened her eyes and stood slowly, reluctant to leave but knowing the peace of the garden would linger even after they stepped away. Leo lifted his lute, cradling it as though it were another companion, and picked up the lantern once more, still unlit. They walked back along the stone path, the night blossoms watching them, the moon guiding them, the keep waiting with its walls aglow. When they entered again, the fire was indeed low, its embers glowing faintly. Miranda added a small log, and flames rose gently, painting the chamber with warmth. They settled once more upon the cushions, sipping water this time, their bodies relaxed, their breaths slow. The night carried on around them, brook, blossoms, stars, and keep, each holding the others in quiet embrace. And as sleep approached softly, Alaska, Leo, and Miranda let themselves drift, knowing tomorrow the blossoms would close, but tonight they had opened for them. Chapter 3, The Library of Whispering Pages. The morning light entered the quiet keep not in a rush but in a gradual, gentle unveiling. Golden shafts of sunlight slid through tall windows, catching on dust motes that drifted lazily in the air, as if even the particles knew this was a place where haste was a stranger. The fire from the night before had faded into embers, but the hearth still held the faint warmth of its glow. Alaska awoke first, as she often did. She stretched slowly beneath her woven blanket, listening to the distant brook, the rustle of ivy along the keep's outer walls, and the faint call of doves nesting in the nearby towers. Her hair fell loosely across her shoulders as she rose, gathering her shawl around her before stepping barefoot onto the cool stone floor. Today, her heart guided her to the library. The keep's library was not vast in the way of grand kingdoms, with endless rows of shelves and ladders reaching high into domes. It was quieter, humbler, yet no less precious. It held what mattered most: stories passed down, wisdom carefully written, poems that sang like soft winds, and journals of those who had lived here before. Its shelves were carved from oak, darkened by time, and the scent of parchment mingled with lavender sprigs tucked between volumes to keep them fresh. As Alaska entered, the light followed her, spilling across wooden tables, touching the bindings of books until they seemed to glow. She trailed her fingers along a shelf, feeling the texture of leather and cloth, each spine worn by gentle hands. She paused before an old volume bound in green velvet, its title pressed in faded silver, The Dreams of Quiet Places. She carried it to the table and sat, opening its pages with care. The words were written in a looping hand, stories of meadows where the grass hummed softly, of rivers that carried lullabies, of starlit paths where travelers found peace. She read slowly, savoring each sentence, as though tasting honey. Leo arrived not long after. His lute hung at his back, but today he carried a small bundle of parchment. He smiled when he saw Alaska at the table. "Already among the whispers of pages," he said softly. Alaska looked up, her eyes shining. "They speak so gently here. You can almost hear the voices of those who wrote them." Leo nodded, setting down his parchment. "I came to write myself. The music lingers after I play, but when I write it down, it feels as though it can live forever, like these words." He unrolled a sheet and dipped a quill into ink. Soon, the scratching of pen joined the quiet of the room, weaving into the soundscape like another form of music. Miranda entered later, carrying a tray with cups of warm milk flavored with honey and herbs. She set it down between them, her presence steady as always. She looked around at the shelves and breathed in deeply. "Every time I come here, I feel as though the air itself has been reading for centuries." They drank together, the warmth of the milk filling them with a comfort that settled deep into their bones. Then Miranda wandered to the shelves, pulling out a journal wrapped in ribbon. She untied it gently and began to read. Her voice was low, steady, almost like a spell. "It says here," she murmured, "that once a traveler came to the keep and spent every evening walking its gardens. He said that he never found the end of their peace, no matter how many nights he stayed." Alaska smiled faintly. Perhaps he never truly left. Perhaps a part of him lingers still, with the blossoms and the stones. Leo's quill paused, his gaze soft. "That is how it feels, isn't it? That peace is not only outside us but within, carried on when we leave the library, or the garden, or even the keep itself." They fell into silence again, but it was not empty. It was the silence of shared thought, of harmony. The rustling of pages, the scratching of quill, the soft sipping of milk, all these sounds blended into a gentle rhythm, one that echoed the stillness of the keep. Hours drifted by unnoticed. Outside, the day remained calm, clouds moving slowly across the sky, their shadows gliding across the valley. Inside, the library held them close, as though the shelves themselves wrapped around them in embrace. Alaska returned to her book, reading passages aloud now and then, lines about moonlit rivers and peaceful groves. Miranda responded with fragments from her journal, while Leo occasionally played a quiet chord on his lute, letting the notes hover like sighs in the air. It became a kind of conversation, not bound by urgency, but woven of fragments, pauses, and smiles. When noon came, Miranda rose and placed the journal back upon its shelf. "The garden will call again soon," she said softly. "But today, I think the library wishes us to stay a little longer." And so they did. They leaned back against the cushions, listening not only to the books but to each other. Their breaths, their stillness, their presence. Later, Alaska closed her green velvet book and laid her hand upon its cover. "It feels," she whispered, "as though the keep itself is reading with us, as though the stones remember every word spoken here." Miranda touched the wooden table gently. "Perhaps they do. That is why they feel so alive." The thought comforted them all. As the afternoon light grew softer, filtering through the tall windows in golden beams, The library seemed to hum, a low, contented sound like the earth itself at rest. They sat until the sun dipped toward the hills, until shadows lengthened and the first whispers of evening entered. At last, Leo gathered his parchments. Miranda tied the journal's ribbon again, and Alaska placed her book gently back on the shelf. They left the library slowly, as though reluctant to disturb its stillness. Outside, the garden waited. The brook sang its familiar tune. The stars would come soon, and with them the blossoms would open again. But for now, the quiet of the library remained within them, carried like a gentle secret in their hearts. And as they walked back toward the hearth, the keep itself seemed to breathe around them, whispering, "Stay, listen, rest." Chapter 4. The Moonlit Garden. Evening crept upon the quiet keep not with haste, but like a gentle tide rolling in, one soft wave at a time. Shadows stretched across the courtyard, lengthening as the sun dipped lower behind the distant hills. The air cooled with a delicate breath, carrying the fragrance of jasmine and the faint spice of wild thyme. Alaska stood at the arched doorway that led into the garden, her shawl drawn lightly around her shoulders. The lantern she carried was not yet needed. The silver of twilight was enough, but she liked the weight of it, the way its small flame flickered like a heartbeat. Behind her, Leo followed, his lute cradled carefully, while Miranda came last, carrying a basket with bread, cheese, and herbs. The garden of the keep was unlike any other. By day, it was a place of roses and fruit trees, quiet pathways winding through neat hedges and shaded corners. But by night, it transformed. Certain blossoms, moonflowers, pale lilacs, soft-petaled lilies, opened only when the stars began their watch. Their fragrance was richer in the coolness, and their glow seemed faintly luminous beneath the moon. The garden breathed differently after dark, as though it too prepared for a night of dreaming. The three companions stepped into the garden's heart, where a fountain stood. Its waters fell with the gentlest of voices, a constant murmur that soothed more deeply than silence. The stone basin gleamed faintly in the moonlight, and above it, vines of ivy draped like curtains, soft and green even in the dimness. Alaska set the lantern down upon the fountain's edge, its flame joining the glow of moon and stars. She inhaled deeply, her eyes closing. This is the hour I love most. The air feels like a song that has slowed almost to silence. Leo strummed a single note on his lute, letting it linger. A note that never ends, a silence that sings back. Miranda set the basket upon a low stone bench, her steady presence grounding them. We should sit. The night is long enough to hold us. So they settled, the three of them, upon cushions they had brought earlier, their small circle warmed by the lantern's glow. The bread was passed, the cheese cut into neat slices, the herbs sprinkled gently. They ate not out of hunger but in ceremony, each bite savored, each sip of water drawn slowly. The meal was as much a part of the night as the fountain's song. When their hands were stilled, Leo lifted his lute once more. His fingers moved lightly across the strings, and a melody unfurled like the night sky itself. Slow, low, steady. It was not a tune to stir or rouse. It was one that soothed, each note descending like falling petals. Alaska leaned back against the ivy-draped stone, her eyes half-lidded, while Miranda folded her hands in her lap, listening with quiet devotion. Above them, the stars revealed themselves one by one. They seemed brighter in this garden than anywhere else in the valley, as though the keep had invited them closer. The moon climbed steadily, its silver light bathing the blossoms until they looked like they had been dipped in frost. Alaska spoke softly, her voice barely above the music. "Do you ever wonder if the flowers know we are here? That they bloom for us, as though we are their guests?" Miranda tilted her head, considering. "I think they bloom for the night itself, but perhaps the night invites us too. Perhaps we are all guests together." Leo smiled faintly, his fingers never pausing. "Then let us play as guests should, grateful, quiet, and in harmony." His song continued, weaving into the fountain's murmur, into the rustle of the leaves. The music carried no urgency, no rise or fall, only the endless flow of calm. The garden seemed to lean in, listening, every petal and blade of grass stilled in reverence. Time passed, though none of them measured it. The night deepened, the air grew cooler, and the lantern's flame flickered more brightly against the darkness. A soft mist began to gather at the garden's edges, curling around the trunks of trees, settling upon the roses like a veil. Alaska rose at last and wandered a short distance, her hands brushing over blossoms as she passed. She paused at a cluster of moonflowers, their white petals wide, their fragrance rich. She bent to breathe them in, her hair falling forward, catching the silver of the moon. "It feels like the world slows down here," she said. "Even my thoughts drift more gently." Miranda joined her, touching a petal with her fingertip. Perhaps that is the gift of the garden, to remind us that we need not rush, that even in stillness, beauty unfolds. Leo's music softened until it was only a murmur, then faded entirely. He rested the lute upon his knee and gazed upward at the vast expanse of stars. "Every note I play feels as though it has already been written in the sky. Perhaps the stars are the music, and I only echo what they already sing." The three of them stood together then, gazing upward. The night wrapped around them, vast and gentle, infinite yet intimate. They felt small beneath it, but never alone. The keep, the garden, the stars, all seemed to hold them in an embrace. After a time, Miranda guided them back to the fountain, where the cushions still waited. She refilled their cups with water cooled by sprigs of mint, and they drank in silence. The fountain's rhythm lulled them, their bodies heavy with peace, their minds softened by the steady pulse of night. Chapter 5, Fireside Whispers. The garden's peace lingered in their minds long after they left its cool embrace. By the time Alaska, Leo, and Miranda returned to the keep, the moon had climbed high, casting silver across the stone walls. The torches along the hallways burned low, their flames steady and golden, guiding them toward the great chamber where the hearth waited. The chamber was vast, yet it never felt empty. The tall windows framed the starlit sky, and tapestries softened the stone, their threads depicting rivers, forests, and skies woven in deep, calming colors. At the far end of the hall, the fireplace glowed. Logs shifted and crackled softly, sending sparks that twirled upward like fleeting stars before fading into embers. Miranda was the first to step inside. She carried a small bundle of herbs, gathered earlier in the day, their fragrance sweet and earthy. She placed them near the hearth, where the warmth would coax their scent into the air. Soon, the chamber was wrapped in a blend of rosemary, lavender, and thyme, a perfume that seemed to sink into the walls themselves. Alaska followed, her lantern still flickering, though its glow was soft compared to the steady blaze of the fire. She set it upon the table, where a tray of cups and a small kettle waited. "Shall we have tea?" she asked, her voice already slower, more relaxed, shaped by the stillness of the night. Leo nodded, unstrapping the lute from his shoulder and setting it gently beside the hearth. "Tea, then song, then quiet," he murmured, as though the order was sacred. Miranda moved with her calm efficiency, preparing the kettle and placing it upon the hook over the fire. Water hissed faintly as it began to warm, the sound blending seamlessly with the crackle of the logs. Alaska selected dried leaves from a pouch, chamomile, mint, and a touch of rose, and crushed them gently between her fingers, their fragrance filling the air. The three of them settled near the fire, each in their favored place. Alaska curled upon a cushion, her shawl around her shoulders. Miranda sat upright, hands folded loosely, her gaze steady upon the flames. Leo stretched out, one arm behind his head, his eyes half closed, as if already half within a dream. The kettle began to sing, soft and steady, and Alaska poured the steaming water into the cups. The liquid caught the firelight, shimmering with a faint golden hue. They drank slowly, savoring each sip, the warmth spreading from their hands into their bodies, loosening the last of the day's weariness. Outside, the wind whispered around the stone walls, a sound as steady and low as the sea's distant tide. It did not disturb, but lulled, as if the keep itself breathed. Leo's voice was the first to break the silence. "Do you ever think of the ones who built this keep? Of how they must have labored, stone by stone, never knowing how many nights like this would be held within these walls?" Miranda nodded. "They built not only for themselves, but for us, though they never knew our names. Each stone laid was a promise to the future. And here we are, keeping their promise by simply resting, by simply being." Alaska smiled faintly, gazing into her cup. "It feels as though the keep remembers them. Every quiet night, every whispered story. It honors the ones who came before." The fire popped softly, sending a spark into the air, as though in agreement. When the tea was finished, Leo reached once more for his lute. He played not a melody of brightness, but one of depth, a low, humming song that resonated like the earth itself. The notes were spaced far apart, lingering in the air, each one falling like a drop of rain into still water. Alaska closed her eyes, listening, while Miranda leaned back, letting her breath match the rhythm of the strings. As the song drifted, Alaska spoke again, her words soft and measured. "I used to fear the night when I was younger. I thought shadows meant danger, that silence meant loneliness. But here in this keep, the night feels different. Feels like a cloak, a safe one." Miranda reached out, placing her hand gently over Alaska's. "That is because the keep teaches us to listen. The night is never empty. It holds fire and wind and stars. It holds us too." Leo plucked one last note, letting it fade into silence. "And sometimes," he said, "silence itself is the song." The three of them sat together, watching the fire settle lower, its flames now weaving like dancers moving more slowly. The heat radiated against their faces, their shadows long across the chamber's floor. Eventually, Miranda rose and fetched a small jar from the table. Inside were honeyed figs, preserved from the summer harvest. She set them out, and the three shared them, the sweetness mingling with the lingering taste of tea. It was a simple feast, but in its simplicity it felt complete. Time drifted. The fire sank lower, embers glowing rich and red. The keep grew quieter still, the world outside hushed. The cups were empty, the lute was still, and their bodies grew heavy with calm. Alaska stretched and lay upon her side, her head upon a folded blanket. Leo reclined beside her, his eyes already closed, the faintest smile on his lips. Miranda remained upright a little longer, watching the embers with steady eyes, as though ensuring that peace itself was guarded. At last, she too allowed her body to soften, her breath slowing to match theirs. The chamber was wrapped in warmth, the fire's glow steady upon their faces, the scent of herbs lingering in the air. Beyond the windows, the moon sailed higher, its light pouring gently into the hall, mingling with the fire until silver and gold danced together. The keep seemed to hum softly, holding them as a mother holds her children, steady and safe. And so the three companions drifted not only toward sleep, but into the embrace of the keep itself. Each breath, each heartbeat, became part of the ancient rhythm of the stones, a rhythm that promised safety, peace, and endless rest. Here, in the fireside whispers of the quiet keep, the night carried them gently into dreams. Chapter 6. Morning in the Tower. The first light of dawn arrived not in haste, but in a gentle drift, like a soft breath over the valley. The quiet keep of Starlight stirred slowly, the stones themselves warming as though they too felt the touch of morning. Beyond the windows, the sky blushed faintly, brushed with hues of rose and pale gold, before deepening into the steady light of day. Inside the great chamber, the hearth had sunk into embers, their glow faint but steady, like the last notes of a lullaby. Alaska stirred upon her folded blanket, her eyes fluttering open. The silence of night had given way to a new silence, softer still, one filled with the faint call of morning birds and the quiet hum of the wind slipping along the walls. She sat up slowly, drawing her shawl around her shoulders, and watched as a pale ribbon of light slid across the floor. The keep's tall windows had shifted their colors. Where once the moon had poured silver, now the sun reached tender fingers of gold. Leo was still asleep, his face calm, the lute lying beside him as though it had played even in his dreams. Miranda sat upright near the fire, as if she had remained watchful long into the night. Her eyes were closed now, her breathing even, her hands folded gently in her lap. Alaska rose and crossed to the windows, pushing the shutters wider. A wash of morning poured into the chamber, carrying with it the crisp scent of dew-soaked grass and the faint sweetness of blossoms that had opened with the dawn. The valley stretched endlessly below, the river winding like silver thread, the meadows still heavy with mist, the distant forest glowing faintly as sunlight kissed its highest branches. For a moment, Alaska simply breathed. Each inhale carried with it the freshness of the new day. Each exhale released the last remnants of dream. The world felt vast and close all at once, as though the keep and valley were joined in one long sigh of peace. Behind her, Leo stirred, rolling onto his back and squinting toward the brightness. Morning already? His voice was hushed, almost reverent, as though afraid to break the spell of dawn. Morning, Alaska replied softly. Come see. He rose reluctantly, stretching, then joined her at the window. His eyes widened at the sight below, where mist curled along the riverbanks and sunlight painted the meadow with shifting gold. "It looks like a painting come alive," he murmured. Miranda's voice joined them then, steady though touched with drowsiness. "The valley greets us as it always does, with gentleness. It is a gift not to be rushed." The three stood together at the window for a while, silent except for their steady breaths. The keep seemed to cradle them there, its stones cool beneath their touch, its height giving them a view that felt both mighty and tender. At last, Miranda turned toward the hearth, placing another small log upon the embers. The fire caught slowly, crackling faintly, warming the chamber with renewed life. "Shall we break our fast?" she asked, her tone calm, as if speaking of something sacred. Alaska nodded. From the table, she brought forth a basket of bread baked the previous day, still soft within, its crust golden. Leo fetched a small pot of honey, thick and amber, gathered from hives in the meadows. Miranda added a jug of milk, cool and fresh. They ate slowly, savoring each bite as though it carried the taste of the valley itself. The bread was soft, the honey sweet and floral, the milk smooth and grounding. Conversation was sparse, not from lack of thought, but because the morning seemed to ask for reverence. Words, when spoken, were as gentle as the dawn. After the meal, Leo lifted his lute once more, strumming a melody that matched the brightness outside. Unlike the night song, this was light and steady, like sunlight bouncing upon ripples of water. Alaska hummed softly with it, her voice weaving through the notes, while Miranda closed her eyes, her expression softened by contentment. When the song faded, they rose together and stepped out into the keep's courtyard. The stones there glowed warmly in the sun, and the air was filled with the flutter of birds taking flight from the eaves. The well in the center mirrored the sky, its surface gleaming like liquid gold. Alaska knelt beside it, dipping her hands into the cool water. She splashed her face lightly, the droplets glistening as they slid across her skin. Leo followed, drinking deeply, while Miranda simply watched, her gaze far away, her thoughts moving like the river, steady and calm. From the courtyard, they wandered toward the tower steps. The spiral staircase wound upward, each stone step cool beneath their feet. As they climbed, the air grew lighter, touched with currents of wind slipping through narrow slits in the walls. Their ascent was slow, deliberate, every footfall echoing faintly, blending with the steady rhythm of their breath. At the top, the tower opened onto a balcony that overlooked the entire valley. Here, the view stretched farther than before. Forests and rivers, meadows and hills, all touched by the golden hand of the rising sun. The mist was beginning to lift, unraveling into threads of light, and the horizon shimmered with the promise of the day. Leo leaned upon the stone railing, his hair stirred by the breeze. "I feel as though the world is endless," he said softly. "It is endless in its beauty," Miranda replied, "and yet it always returns us home." Alaska closed her eyes, letting the wind press softly against her face, carrying the sense of grass, pine, and distant wildflowers. She felt as though the keep itself breathed with her, steady and eternal. They lingered there, the three of them, letting the morning soak into their bones. No thought of duty or burden stirred within them, only the knowledge that peace was enough, that stillness could carry them farther than any journey. At last, Miranda placed her hand upon the railing, her fingers tracing the cool stone. "Shall we carry this calm with us into the day?" she asked. Alaska nodded, her eyes still closed. "Yes, let us hold it, like a lantern." Leo strummed his lute softly, one single note that hung in the air like sunlight itself. The valley below seemed to echo it, the river gleaming brighter, the birds rising higher, the meadows swaying more gently. The world, awake and calm, sang in harmony with the keep. And so, with the morning wrapped around them, the companions let the day begin. Not with haste, not with demand, but with the quiet certainty that peace was their truest song. Chapter 7. The Library of Quiet Echoes. The sun had climbed higher, softening the valley's mist into streams of gold. Within the quiet keep of Starlight, time flowed unhurriedly, the hours melting together like wax of a slow-burning candle. The courtyard now basked in full light, its stones warm beneath the sun. Yet inside the keep, cool shadows lingered in the hallways, beckoning the companions to explore further. After their morning atop the tower, Alaska was the first to suggest wandering deeper into the keep. "There are whispers in these walls," she said with a small smile. "I feel as though the keep wants us to find something." Leo's eyes brightened at the thought. "Perhaps another chamber for music," he mused, his lute already hanging from his shoulder like a loyal companion. Miranda's gaze grew thoughtful, her hands resting at the folds of her gown. "I believe," she said quietly, "that we may discover the library today." The word library hung in the air like an old spell, and with it came a hush softer than silence, as though even the keep leaned closer to listen. They moved together through the cool stone corridors, their steps soft against the worn flagstones. Light streamed in narrow shafts through arrow-slit windows, painting long streaks across the floors. Dust motes shimmered in the beams, drifting lazily as though time itself had slowed. It was Miranda who guided them, her intuition attuned to the keep's quiet pulse. She led them through a narrow archway, down a passage that curved gently like a winding stream. The air there grew cooler, carrying the faint, dry scent of parchment and aged oak. At the end of the passage stood a tall door of dark wood, its surface carved with winding vines and tiny stars. No lock barred it, only a heavy handle wrought of iron, smooth with age. Alaska reached out, her fingers tracing the carvings. "It feels alive," she whispered. Miranda inclined her head. "The keep remembers those who open its doors with care." With a soft push, the door swung open. A breath of still air greeted them, filled with the scent of old paper, polished wood, and faint traces of lavender, as though someone long ago had scattered dried petals between the shelves. Inside, the library opened vast and hushed, its walls lined from floor to ceiling with books bound in leather, cloth, and faded parchment. Sunlight fell through tall windows of stained glass, painting the chamber in shifting hues of amber, emerald, and sapphire. The silence was profound but not empty. It was the kind of silence that listened, that welcomed, that seemed to hold the stories of countless lives within it. Leo exhaled softly. "It feels like a cathedral of words." Alaska stepped forward slowly, her eyes wide, her fingertips brushing the spines of the nearest row. Some were smooth and unmarked, others embossed with gold letters worn thin by centuries. Each book seemed to hum faintly, as though eager to be remembered. Miranda moved with practiced grace, her hands hovering over the shelves without touching. "Every library has a rhythm," she murmured. "This one beats gently, like a steady heart." They wandered separately at first, each drawn to different corners. Leo found a cluster of slim volumes filled with songs, notations marked by careful ink. with notes that curved like river paths. He strummed a quiet tune from one, the sound fragile but beautiful, filling the vast chamber without disturbing its stillness. Alaska discovered books filled with painted illustrations, gardens rendered in vivid color, stars traced across parchment in maps that glittered faintly when held to the light. She traced the lines of constellations with her fingertip, imagining the night skies of centuries past. Miranda chose a high shelf, drawing forth a tome bound in soft gray leather. She carried it carefully to a long wooden table at the center of the room. The table itself bore carvings of vines and leaves, its surface polished smooth by time. She opened the book slowly, revealing pages of delicate script interspersed with quiet sketches of herbs, roots, and blossoms. One by one, the others joined her at the table. Leo set his songbook beside the herbal volume, while Alaska brought forth a star map bound in indigo. The three bent over the pages together, their voices hushed as they traced the patterns, as though the books themselves were speaking softly through them. Time moved differently there. Minutes stretched into hours, but none of them felt the weight of it. The air was cool, scented faintly with paper and sunlight, their breaths slow and even. Each turn of a page was a gentle sound, each word read aloud no louder than a whisper. After some time, Alaska leaned back, closing her eyes for a moment. "It feels like being inside a dream," she murmured. Leo nodded, strumming the faintest line of melody as though agreeing. "The dream doesn't want to end." Miranda's gaze softened as she closed the herbal tome, resting her palm lightly on its cover. "Dreams such as these are meant to be carried with us," she said, "even when the library doors close." The stained glass windows shifted as the sun lowered, scattering new colors across the chamber. Warm amber turned to soft violet. Emerald gave way to deep blue. The light felt like a lullaby itself, marking the passing of the day with tenderness. Alaska rose then, moving slowly toward the windows. She stood with the light upon her face, her expression serene. "This is a place we will return to," she said with certainty. "Yes," Leo agreed softly, "whenever we need to remember the stillness." Miranda closed the book fully and gathered it into her arms. She returned it to its shelf with reverence, her touch lingering on the spine for a moment before stepping back. The other two did the same, placing their volumes carefully, as though returning them to a gentle slumber. When at last they left the library, closing the carved door behind them, they carried with them not the weight of knowledge, but the lightness of quiet peace. The corridor felt warmer now, the air touched with the scent of the evening beginning beyond the stone walls. As they walked back toward the chamber of the hearth, their silence was not empty but shared, filled with the steady rhythm of three hearts in harmony with the keep itself. And when they reached the fire once more, its glow already brightening against the coming dusk, they sat together without words, letting the hush of the library linger in their thoughts like the last note of a song. Chapter 8, Courtyard of Stars. Evening settled upon the quiet keep as a gentle hand would draw a shawl across the shoulders. The light faded slowly, the colors of day dissolving into the muted hush of dusk. A cool breeze slipped through the narrow windows, carrying with it the sense of pine and distant heather. Alaska was the first to rise from the fireside, her eyes thoughtful as she gazed toward the arched doorway that opened into the keep's courtyard. "We should greet the night beneath the open sky," she said softly. "The stars must be gathering." Leo adjusted the lute at his side, smiling as though the thought of playing under the stars had already been stirring in him. "Music belongs to the night as much as to the morning," he murmured. Miranda gathered her shawl, the pale fabric catching the flicker of firelight. "Let us go," she agreed, her voice like velvet in the hush. Together they walked the familiar passageway that curved gently toward the courtyard. The stones were cool beneath their feet, whispering faintly with the memory of countless steps. The air deepened as they neared the great arch, carrying with it the first notes of evening, the faint chirr of crickets, the quiet stirrings of leaves beyond the keep's walls. When they stepped outside, the courtyard greeted them with stillness. The last traces of the sunset lingered low on the horizon, a faint band of rose and gold melting into violet. Above, the first stars had already emerged, pale sparks against the deepening sky. The courtyard itself seemed transformed. By day, it had been a place of stone and sunlight, but by night it softened into shadow and silver light. The well at its center caught the glow of the rising moon, and the ivy that climbed the walls gleamed faintly as though dusted with frost. Alaska walked slowly to the well, leaning against its smooth rim. She tilted her face upward, her dark hair catching the starlight like threads of midnight. "It feels as though the sky has descended closer to night," she whispered. Leo set his lute carefully upon his knee and plucked a few notes, the sound delicate and shimmering in the open air. The chords floated upward, weaving themselves between the stars. "The heavens are listening," he said with a smile. Miranda, ever composed, lowered herself gracefully onto a stone bench that edged the courtyard. She folded her hands and allowed her gaze to wander across the sky. Her lips parted slightly, as though in prayer, though no words came, only silence, reverent and whole. The stars multiplied as the night deepened, scattered across the sky in uncountable patterns. Some shone brightly like watchful eyes, while others glimmered faint and far. The constellations stretched across the darkness, ancient shapes traced in silver threads. Leo began to play a melody, soft and unhurried. It was not a song of triumph nor sorrow, but of stillness, a tune that mirrored the night itself. Each note rose gently, lingered, and then faded into the quiet. Alaska listened, her breathing slowing, her eyes drifting half-closed as the music wove around her. Miranda, watching them both, spoke at last. "There is a kind of peace that belongs only to nights such as these," she said. "A peace that carries no weight, only rest." The words settled into their hearts, becoming part of the night's fabric. After a while, Alaska lifted her hand and pointed toward a cluster of stars near the eastern horizon. "Look there," she said softly. "The hunter's crown. My mother once told me it shines brightest in early autumn." Leo's melody shifted subtly, shaping itself to echo the pattern of her words. "Then we shall play to the crown," he whispered. Miranda tilted her head back, her eyes calm, and listened for what the crown might sing in return. The courtyard seemed suspended beyond time. The walls of the keep, strong and silent, held the night gently, as though guarding not only their bodies but their dreams. The ivy swayed faintly in the breeze, the leaves whispering like pages being turned. Hours passed like drifting clouds, unnoticed and unmeasured. The moon climbed higher, casting silver across the stones. Its glow bathed their faces, softening every line, making them appear almost as figures in a painting, three souls stilled by the embrace of the night. At one point, Leo set his lute aside and joined Alaska at the well. He cupped water into his palms, drinking quietly, then offered some to her. She accepted, the water cool and sweet, reflecting the stars as it rippled. Miranda's voice came softly then, barely louder than a breath. When I was a child, I believed the stars were candles lit by guardians who never sleep. Tonight, I almost believe it still. Alaska smiled faintly, her eyes luminous. Perhaps they are. Perhaps each star is a light held for us, so we do not feel alone. No one hurried to answer, for the silence itself seemed more eloquent than any words. The night deepened further, and with it came a hush that pressed closer. The crickets quieted, the breeze softened, until only the sound of their breathing and the occasional faint twang of a lute string filled the air. Leo, his voice low, began to hum, a sound that blended seamlessly with the night. Alaska leaned against the well, her head tilting until her hair brushed the stone. Miranda closed her eyes, hands folded in her lap. The three of them sat in perfect stillness, their hearts attuned to the rhythm of the stars above. When the first signs of midnight touched the air, cool and still, they knew it was time to rest. Without speaking, they rose together, moving back toward the archway. Their steps were slow, as though reluctant to leave the courtyard's embrace. But even as the walls of the keep closed around them again, the starlight lingered, carried within their eyes, their breaths, their hearts. They returned to the chamber of the hearth, where the fire had sunk into glowing embers. Settling near its warmth, they exchanged no words, for none were needed. The courtyard had already given them more than speech could hold. As they closed their eyes and drifted into sleep, the keep itself seemed to exhale gently, its stones humming with the memory of the night sky. Above, unseen through the ceiling, the stars continued to shine, keeping vigil over the quiet keep and all who rested within it. Chapter 9. The Moonlit Forest. The night stretched onward, gentle and unbroken, and within the quiet keep, the three companions stirred from their rest by the hearth. Alaska's eyes opened first, drawn not by sound nor urgency, but by the quiet pull of the moon. Its silver glow spilled through the narrow window, laying a path of light upon the stone floor. She rose carefully, adjusting her cloak about her shoulders. Leo shifted beside the embers, blinking as he too noticed the glow. "The forest calls tonight," he murmured, his voice low, as though afraid to disturb the stillness. Miranda sat upright, her hair falling in soft waves across her shawl. Her gaze followed the moonlight, and after a moment she nodded. "Let us walk beneath the trees. The keep has held us in its arms. Now let us breathe with the forest." The three moved together in silence, their steps soft against the flagstones. They passed through the long hall, where tapestries hung in shadowed folds, and out through the great doors that opened toward the outer path. The air greeted them cool and sweet, tinged with pine and the faint perfume of wildflowers that lingered even at night. The forest lay only a short walk from the keep's walls. Its edge rose like a soft curtain, the trees dark but welcoming, their branches stretched upward to hold the night. The moon guided their way, painting silver across the undergrowth and tracing outlines upon trunks. Alaska walked a little ahead, her hands trailing over the ivy that draped the stone arch at the forest's entrance. "It feels like stepping into another chamber of the keep," she said quietly. "Only here, the roof is endless. Leo carried his lute at his side, though he did not play yet. The hush of the forest seemed to be its own music, the chorus of crickets, the faint rustle of leaves, and the soft beat of wings as an owl lifted into flight above them. Miranda followed at a steady pace, her expression serene. She brushed her fingers across the bark of a passing tree, as though greeting an old friend. "Each tree holds the night differently," she whispered. "Some cradle it gently, others stand watch like guardians." They moved deeper, the canopy weaving itself overhead. Moonlight filtered through in slender beams, falling across the path like scattered ribbons. The earth was soft beneath their steps, muffled with moss and fallen leaves. For a long while, none of them spoke. The forest did not ask for conversation. It invited listening. Alaska's breath slowed, matching the rhythm of her steps. Leo's shoulders loosened, and he began to hum faintly, his voice weaving with the night. Miranda closed her eyes now and then as they walked, feeling the hush settle deeper into her spirit. At a small clearing, they paused. The moon shone unobstructed here, casting silver across the open grass. In its light, wildflowers gleamed pale, some white, some faintly blue, all glowing as though they had captured pieces of the stars. Alaska knelt among them, brushing her fingertips over the petals. "They sleep in color and wake in light," she said softly. Leo sat upon a fallen log and finally lifted his lute. The melody he played was quiet, almost a whisper, shaped to echo the sway of branches overhead. Each note lingered as though the air itself held it gently before letting it go. Miranda remained standing, her gaze lifted toward the heavens. "The stars feel closer here," she said, "as though the trees draw them down to us." The three lingered in the clearing, wrapped in music and starlight. Time felt weightless. The forest did not measure hours. It measured breath and silence, shadow and glow. When at last they rose again, their path curved alongside a brook that trickled softly between stones. The water shimmered under the moon, each ripple a fragment of silver in motion. Alaska leaned down to trail her fingers through it, feeling the coolness spread into her palm. Leo knelt beside her, listening to the brook as if it played a tune all its own. "Every stream has a song," he murmured. "This one sings of stillness." Miranda placed her staff gently upon the earth and dipped her hands into the water. She lifted them slowly, letting droplets fall back in a rhythm like rainfall. "And stillness is the deepest kind of music," she replied. Their journey carried them onward, though never in haste. Each step was unhurried, as if the forest itself slowed time. The moon rode high above, steady and unwavering, guiding them with its silver gaze. Deeper still, they found another clearing, this one ringed with tall pines whose branches met to form a natural arch. In the center lay a stone, broad and smooth, as though it had waited centuries for their arrival. Alaska seated herself upon it, gazing upward through the arch of branches. "It feels like a temple," she whispered. Leo settled beside her, plucking a single soft chord. "A temple where silence is prayer." Miranda stood behind them, her figure framed by moonlight, and the stars are the guardians of its doors. Together they sat in reverence, not of gods nor altars, but of the night itself, the sacred quiet, the endless sky, the forest breathing around them. After a long time, Leo laid his lute aside, and Alaska rested her head upon his shoulder. Miranda remained still, her hands folded before her, her eyes reflecting the silver light. No one spoke of leaving, for there was no need. The forest did not demand departure. It offered a timeless pause. Eventually, when the moon had begun its slow descent, they rose gently, as one might rise from a prayer. Their path turned back toward the keep, though their hearts lingered still beneath the trees. As they neared the courtyard, the ivy-draped walls greeted them once more, the keep standing steady as though it, too, had kept watch during their absence. They crossed the threshold in silence, their steps echoing faintly within the halls. Back in the chamber of the hearth, the embers still glowed, waiting patiently. Alaska spread her cloak upon the floor, lying close to the warmth. Leo placed his lute beside him and stretched out with a sigh. Miranda drew her shawl about her shoulders and lowered herself gracefully, her eyes closing at once. The keep exhaled around them, its stones holding the memory of their return. Outside, the forest continued to hum, its song mingling with the stars. Within the quiet keep of Starlight, 3 hearts drifted into slumber, their dreams stitched with moonlight and the hush of trees. Chapter 10. Dawn's Gentle Embrace. The night deepened one last time, wrapping the quiet keep in a blanket of silver and silence. Outside, the forest breathed softly, its branches swaying like the slow rhythm of a lullaby. Within the stone walls, the 3 companions lay close to the hearth, the embers casting a dim amber glow that mingled with moonlight slipping through the window. Alaska stirred first, though her eyes remained closed for a moment. She listened to the low hum of crickets beyond the walls, to the faint crackle of wood, to the calm breathing of Leo and Miranda beside her. Each sound felt like a thread in the tapestry of the night, woven into something whole and steady. When her eyes opened, she found the fire nearly gone, its glow soft and patient. She pulled her cloak tighter around her shoulders and sat up slowly, gazing out the window. The moon lingered above the forest, but already the horizon held a hint of change. A faint lightning, a promise of dawn. Leo shifted next, stretching before sitting upright. His hair fell across his brow, catching what remained of the fire's glow. He rubbed his eyes and smiled faintly at Alaska's quiet vigil. "You're watching the morning arrive," he said, his voice hushed but warm. "I don't want to miss it," she replied. "The night has given us so much. It feels right to greet the day when it comes." Miranda woke last, though she opened her eyes without surprise, as though she too had been listening in silence. She sat gracefully, pulling her shawl about her. Her gaze followed Alaska's to the window. "The sky prepares a gentle gift," she whispered. "Let us meet it together." The 3 rose and moved slowly through the keep, their steps soft along the corridors. The torches in the hall had burned low, their flames faint, their smoke curling lazily upward. When they reached the great doors, they paused as one, hands brushing over the cool wood before opening them outward. The air that met them was crisp and cool, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. The stars still shone above, though their brilliance had softened. The eastern sky, just beyond the hills, glowed with the faintest silver blue, a herald of the sun yet unseen. Alaska drew in a deep breath, letting the freshness fill her chest. Leo tilted his head upward, watching the paling heavens. Miranda closed her eyes, her lips curved in a serene smile. Together they stepped down from the keep and onto the path that led to the meadow beyond. The forest was quiet now, the animals still at rest, but a gentle shift was in the air, a pause, as though all the world awaited the light to come. The brook murmured softly at the forest's edge, its voice steady but subdued, as though it too prepared for morning. They reached the meadow, where dew clung to each blade of grass, shimmering faintly under the last touch of moonlight. The three stood side by side, watching as the horizon brightened slowly, the silver blue deepening into hues of pale rose and gold. No one spoke. Words would have broken the spell. Instead, they breathed together, their hearts attuned to the slow unfolding of the dawn. The first bird sang then, a clear and delicate note that rose above the hush. Another answered, then another, until the air filled with gentle music. Alaska clasped her hands before her, her eyes glistening in the growing light. "It feels like a promise," she murmured. Leo nodded, his voice soft. "A promise that every night, no matter how deep, yields to this." Miranda let her shawl fall loose, her hair lifting gently in the breeze. "And every dawn is a blessing, given freely." The sun appeared at last, its rim peeking above the distant hills. Light spilled slowly across the meadow, turning dew to diamonds and painting the trees in hues of gold. The quiet keep glowed in its embrace, its towers no longer shadowed but bathed in gentle warmth. They watched in silence, the rising sun filling their eyes with brightness and their spirits with calm. Time seemed unmeasured again, stretched into something endless. The day had begun, yet there was no haste, no call to move quickly. Only the certainty of light, the softness of its gift. After a long while, they turned back toward the keep. The air warmed gently as the sun climbed, but the peace of the night remained with them, carried like a secret within their hearts. Inside, the halls no longer felt shadowed. The dim torchlight was replaced by natural glow, streaming through high windows and scattering across the stone. The great chamber of the hearth brightened, its embers stirring back to life as if awakened by the sun itself. Alaska laid her cloak neatly beside the fire. Leo placed his lute upon the table, its polished wood catching the morning light. Miranda lowered herself onto the bench, her hands folded in her lap, her smile steady and calm. The three exchanged a long glance. No words, only the quiet understanding that something within them had shifted. The night had given them rest, the forest had given them its song, and now the dawn had given them renewal. Alaska leaned her head back, her eyes closing. Leo hummed faintly, a tune as soft as breath. Miranda let her gaze drift to the window, where the golden light poured through. The quiet keep of Starlight seemed to breathe with them. Its stones warmed, its shadows softened. Outside, the forest stirred fully awake, its leaves shimmering, its brooks singing more clearly. The meadow lay open in golden sheen, and the sky stretched wide with endless promise. Within those walls, the three companions let stillness hold them once more. For though the day had begun, the peace of the night lingered, a memory that would never fade. And so the story rested where it began, in silence, in light, in the gentle embrace of a keep that watched over them, always steady, always serene.